So we're going to start with part one. The first thing to think about is how do we know if our implementation fidelity is in place? Are we doing those 5 critical features of classroom management the way we think we are? And we need to make sure we're measuring that before we move on and say whether or not students are responding or not. So now that we're kind of collecting all of that information, we're going to think really carefully about how do we use it to guide our decision making. And the reason we're going to do that is because we actually know we make better decisions when we use data. We make more effective and more efficient decisions. The quality of our decision making depends most on the quality of our definition. Did we really clearly define the problem that needs to be solved? Because that's going to inform how we measure it. That's in turn going to inform how we intervene. So those first couple of steps that we started talking about in Module 3 and we'll come back to in this module are really important, making sure we have a really solid understanding of what the behavior is we're trying to change or what the problem is that we're trying to fix. And then data also help us put the problem in the context in which it's occurring. So it's not that Johnny's a problem student, it's that in this particular context, Johnny is struggling with this particular behavior. And the data help us put that problem in that context and then help us think about how we can make changes to that context to help support Johnny. So there's a general process for thinking about how do we think about classroom problems or issues. The first is to think about what behavior is important to monitor. And there's 2 general categories we need to think about. The one we're most used to thinking about is student academic and behavioral outcomes. Are the kids learning the skills that we want them to learn? Is their reading getting better? Is their math getting better? Is their behavior getting better? The other one that we sometimes don't think as much about is we need to measure our fidelity of implementation. Are we doing what we said we were going to do? Are we implementing the behavior plan that we said we were going to implement? Do we have those 5 critical features of classroom management in place the way we think we do? And that's a really important thing to think about before we determine whether or not a student is responding to an intervention, because they can't respond to something they've not experienced. So we need to make sure that's in place first. The second step is to think about what question do we need to answer? And one of the most important questions to think about is just simply, is this a problem? Do we have a problem here that we need to solve? Is the student's behavior bad enough that we need to intervene? Is this classroom environment bad enough that we need to make some changes? And so thinking about is the behavior, how does it behave? How does the behavior or the target behavior that you're looking at compare to local norms, compare to the student's previous levels of behavior? The next piece is to think about sort of levels, trends, and peaks. Is this something that's generally getting better? Is it generally getting worse? Is it spiking? And does it tend to spike at the same time every year? All of those sorts of things. And then if we identify a problem, then we need to think about what data do we need to help guide our intervention? What are the data that we need to help make a good decision? So this is the basic process that we're going to follow as we go through this module. You can find a lot more information about this process in a technical guide that's available on pbis.org. It has another giant name, but it is listed on the Classroom tab of pbis.org under the heading Data Guide. And it gives you a lot of information about how to select measurement tools and how to use data to guide your intervention in your classroom. We're going to pull today's content from that data guide. And so it starts with these key questions. The first one, as we talked about, is are those core features of classroom management in place with fidelity? So are those 5 critical features in place? If you've already determined that you need to enhance those features based on your student population, are you implementing it in that enhanced way? So we're going to think first about fidelity. Next, we're going to think about whether the kids are responding. Are the kids achieving our desired outcomes? If no, what is the nature of the problem? If we don't have our classroom practices in place with fidelity, what's going on? What are the barriers that are in the way? How do we solve that problem? If our students are not responding the way we want them to, what's in the way? What's the nature of the problem, and how do we refine that understanding of what's going on in order to guide our decision making? If the kids are responding, we're going to just continue to monitor and make sure that that continues to be true across time. Once we've identified the nature of the problem, whether it's a problem with implementation fidelity or a problem with kid outcomes, we're going to develop an action plan that helps us think about how to intensify or modify our implementation of those practices. So we're going to go through these 4 steps throughout this module. In each of these situations, you need to think about the social validity and equity of what it is that you're doing. So we know that when we think about measurement, we need to make sure we're measuring things that are socially important, and that we're measuring things in a way that provides equitable access and outcomes for students. We aren't going to talk specifically about that in this module, but that data guide that I mentioned provides a lot of information about how to measure each of these things for each of these 4 areas. So I'd encourage you to check that out. All right, so the first one, are the core features of classroom management in place and implemented with fidelity? How would we know that? We've talked about a variety of different ways to measure behavior, and we're going to go back to some of those when we think about how would we measure implementation fidelity of classroom practices. There are a lot of different tools, and in that data guide on page 7, you will see a lot of them listed, and the hyperlinks are right there, and they are free or very low cost tools for you to be able to use to think about and to measure whether or not the classroom practices are in place in your classroom. They fall into a couple different categories. There are some self-assessments that you can use to just reflect on the extent to which you're using those core practices. There are some direct observation checklists that you could give to a peer or a coach or an administrator to do an overall assessment of your classroom management skills. There are tools that you can use to monitor specific skills. So if you're interested in, for example, your use of opportunities to respond, there are tools that you can use for direct observation of just opportunities to respond or just specific praise statements. There are also ways that you can self-manage your use of those skills, and there are tools listed in this table for that as well. The key is that you choose the measure that matches the sort of intensity of your question. If you, in general, feel pretty good about what's happening in your classroom, a simple self-assessment or a peer observation might be enough to just help you think about what are your areas of strength, what are the areas that you want to work on. If you have a pretty intensive situation and you know you need some more direct support, it might be helpful to use one of the more intensive tools here to help get more specific information about what's going on in your particular situation. We're going to stop here and ask you to do a quick discussion board post. One of the tools that we'd like you to take a look at is available free at nepbis.org. And as we update this tool, we will keep the newest updated version at nepbis.org. It's a quick checklist of each of the critical features of classroom management that we've talked about in this course. And we'd like you to just use it as a self-assessment. So take a look at that checklist and think about your instruction. It's helpful to think about a particular class period. So maybe choose a particular lesson, and then right after that lesson, use this checklist to think about how well you implemented each of these critical features of classroom management during that specific lesson. Once you've filled that out, think about what are your 1 or 2 areas of strength, and what are a couple of areas that you think you'd like to target improving. And then just post that as a discussion board post for your colleagues and say, these are my areas of strength, these are the areas I'd like to work on, and see if you can make connections with some of your colleagues who have similar areas of strength or who might be looking to improve in similar areas, and see if you can figure out how to support each other in that. Welcome back from that activity. I hope that was a helpful conversation that you had with your colleagues that are taking this course with you. We want you to just think a little bit about using this self-assessment as a chance to, first of all, celebrate your areas of strength. We all have different strengths and weaknesses, and often as educators, we don't spend enough time celebrating the things we're good at. So take a look at your self-assessment and pat yourself on the back for the things that you're currently doing well in your classroom. Also use this self-assessment as an opportunity to reflect on the content from this course. Are there strategies or practices that you need some extra review on? Use this as a chance to go back and review some of that content from past modules to make sure you're really fluent with that content, because we're really going to fall back on these exact same strategies for the rest of this course, and this is really your chance to make sure that you're really fluent with those. Consider options for recruiting support in areas where you're still struggling. Think about ways you can support yourself by self-monitoring and setting goals and taking a little data on yourself. Ask a peer to help support you, do some observations, give you some feedback. If you have a behavior coach or an administrator that's a support for you in your building, consider asking those people for support. But use your self-assessment as a way to really ask for targeted support. So it's more than just I need help in my classroom. It's I'm really working to improve my opportunities to respond, or I'd like to become more positive in my classroom. Please help me identify places where I can increase my rates of praise. Those sorts of things are a little bit easier for others to support us in. So use this self-assessment as a way for you to really reflect and improve on your own practice, and then we'll use this going forward as we start to assess kid response to our practices in the next part of this module.